It's Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, here on Sunday, the 22nd, to give my daily update on how the state is responding to the pandemic that's before us. I'm going to begin with a clarification of something I said yesterday. One of the things that we've received a number of communications about throughout the legislature in recent days is what happens if I lose my insurance because I've been laid off. And I had mentioned that for some people, if your income is reduced substantially, it is likely that you're now eligible for the state's Medicaid program. In that case, if you go on the state's Medicaid office website, and I can direct you to that if you need help or can't find it, you should be eligible for the state's Medicaid program. For other people whose income may go down but not so substantially that they qualify for our Medicaid program, both Blue Cross Blue Shield and MVP have opened up what they call open enrollment. So normally you would not be able to sign up for a health plan right now, but in light of this crisis, they are opening up what they call their exchange plans. But I had said you call MVP and Blue Cross Blue Shield, you actually call Vermont Health Connect. And when you call Vermont Health Connect, they will give you the options, which include either Blue Cross Blue Shield or MVP plans. So I do encourage people, if you are suddenly without health insurance from your employer, please make sure that you have coverage, because even in the face of this crisis, it's still important that you have the ability to deal with emergent health situations. I also wanted to say I made brief reference to the fact that the U.S. Senate, when they passed the House language on the federal relief Phase 2, it's being called Phase 2 because there's going to be another piece of legislation coming this week, that 8 people voted against it, and I found that somewhat unusual. And I was surprised to see that some were voting no in Congress because they did not like a provision which allowed people to take the newly created federal paid leave program, which exists for this crisis, if they were in what I think the language they use is domestic partnership. So there were some who argued that that the Congress was creating a new definition of family, and obviously those individuals were motivated by not allowing same-sex couples to receive paid leave if their partner had to be home because of suffering the effects of this virus. So in a time of crisis like this, and I'm really proud that in Vermont people are banding together across philosophical lines, it was somewhat discouraging that people would put their views on same-sex couples, that they would actually prefer that infection actually have a chance to spread greater because of their views on same-sex couples. On Tuesday, the Senate is going to be going back to Montpelier to cast what we're calling some emergency measures that need to happen immediately in order to allow certain responses to this crisis, especially in human services and unemployment, to get those done and out of the way to allow the system to start helping respond quickly and flexibly. I've had several questions about why the Senate would go in to Montpelier to cast its votes at a time when we're telling people to distance. Why don't we just vote remotely? And it's a pretty, for those who don't follow procedural questions like this, I'll just say that the Senate is governed by rules, as is the House. And one of our rules, and I'll actually read it for you, it's Rule 56 in the Senate rules, says a senator shall be seated in his or her seat when voting. There are a number of other rules related to the way we proceed. The reason all these rules are in place is to make sure that every elected person has the ability to carry out their duties, which our Constitution grants to them as their elected representatives of their constituents. It's also meant to protect the minority membership of the Senate so that the way actions are taken and votes are cast respects all the different perspectives of the 30 people who show up in the Senate on behalf of the people of the state. When we have these rules, it provides everyone with a clear fair play set of rules so that we know how we can conduct our work even when we disagree. So, we have to go in part because our rules require it. However, one of the things we are actively planning to do is passing an emergency rule. To pass an emergency rule that would allow for remote voting in a time of emergency like the one we're having. But you can quickly imagine the dilemma we face. In order to pass an emergency rule to allow us to carry out the state's business remotely, it means we have to actually be there in person to pass the emergency rule. So what we're hoping to do is have the least number of senators present. We are going to space out the voting so that people are not all in the room at the same time. We have strongly encouraged people to not feel that they need to come, especially if they might be in a higher risk group. And because the measures we're voting on will all be what we believe are consensus measures with either no opposition or virtually no opposition in the legislature, we are encouraging people to communicate to their constituents that if they do not attend on Tuesday, it is not because they are not carrying out their duties and stepping up and helping in any way they can in the meantime. It is simply because we want to have the most safe environment to pass these emergency measures. Some people might say, well, who cares? It's just a Senate rule. Like, the thing's been in there for 40, 50, 60, 100 years. Just break the rule and vote remotely. But I would just point out what's been going on in Washington in recent years as an example of why you do have to follow the rules and what the consequences are if you don't. We have seen from time to time the executive branch do things that were the purview of the legislative branch, meaning the president and his team doing things that are actually the constitutional responsibility of Congress. So the way it's played out almost every single time is president overreaches, Congress goes to court, court puts a stay on the policy the president tries to usher in. So it's a separation of power issue there. But there are other issues where conducting committee meetings on the Senate side, sometimes on the House side, where you will hear people saying that this is in violation of our rules. The reason for really cherishing the rules that we have is to make sure that both sides are treated fairly. And I've always believed you have to be very cautious about changing long-standing rules. They're usually there to protect whichever side happens to be in the minority at a moment in time. You have to assume the pendulum swings over the course of time, and you don't want to change rules just to benefit your side. Anyways, that's a long-winded way of explaining why the rules matter, and we are going to be moving to create more flexibility for remote Senate voting. We are going to have to figure out what technology ensures that the individual senator can clearly be heard and hopefully seen so that we know that the person voting remotely is actually the person. That's one of the worries and one of the reasons we require votes to happen in person. So let me quickly tell you what is going to be on the table, and some of it will relate to the discussion we just had. The first, and this might be the least, I don't know, I'll let you be the judge, might be the least interesting of the things we're going to vote on. It relates to the Department of Motor Vehicles allowing for 90-day extensions of things like driver's licenses, registrations, handicap placards, a number of things which have shelf lives that we are going to extend by 90 days. The Department of Motor Vehicles, through an executive action, did all of these things. However, the lawyers for the legislature have determined that those extensions are actually not within the governor's direct authority, even if we think that they're very reasonable and good things to do, which we do. So one of the things we're going to do, since we're going to be back on Tuesday, is to do all of the same actions but put them in statute, which is the right place for them to be done. It's the legally appropriate way to be done. It gets back to this issue of, on principle, making sure that the boundaries of the branches of government are respected. And even in a time of emergency, you have to do your best to honor those boundaries and rules that are in place. Couple other important things in there, ranging, I think these will perhaps be more interesting. We are going to be creating greater expansion of those who will be eligible for unemployment insurance. Right now, those who are laid off are obviously eligible if they've been paying into the unemployment system. Some individual workers have been allowed to qualify under some federal rules related to if you're home caring for someone, like a child whose school's closed, or if you have been directed by a doctor to stay home because you have either been infected or at risk of infection. We are providing a slight expansion on that concept so that if there's someone who cannot be at work for related reasons but that didn't fall under those typical categories, that you also will qualify for unemployment benefits. An example might be if an individual believes that he or she is not able to be in the workplace in a working environment that is consistent with the CDC and Vermont Department of Health guidelines about safe distance from one another and other kind of sanitary working conditions in this time of crisis. We do not want the person who believes he or she is acting in the public's health in trying to save lives to not be eligible for unemployment insurance. So that is the kind of expansion that we're trying to look at and hope to vote on Tuesday. We are also going to be providing, and I've mentioned this in some previous calls, and the language is still being fine-tuned between the respective Senate and House committee members, related to expanded telemedicine to make sure more people can get more of the services they very much need from home using video or video and audio. It will include flexibility for hospitals to create more physical space because we know there are going to need to be more beds in the short term. And a variety of other policies related to making sure people can get longer prescription refills so they don't have to keep going back to the pharmacy, and a handful of other strategies. Then the last piece I'll mention for now is the changes we'll be making around local meetings and making sure that they're not violating state law if they meet remotely. Right now there needs to be a physical location that is open with a person there so that if the members of the public want to attend, they can do it. In these emergency times, we still want public access, but would like it to be done by the ability of members of the public or press to listen in and possibly speak through teleconferencing, which makes life more difficult for everyone. But if we're saying we don't want people gathering, the physical space requirement has really caused huge problems for school boards and select boards and everybody else at the local level. So this will help open up the doors a little bit to allow government to start moving again at the local level. Just to put in perspective how fast things are moving, we just received a request from the judicial branch to make some emergency changes to procedures. And there are many things that we say, oh, well, in an emergency, let's make everything flexible. But, of course, there are consequences. So to put it in perspective, the entire judicial branch has effectively shut down all the doors right now, meaning everybody who is in the criminal justice system and maybe needs a hearing to determine the length of their sentence, whether they're going to be detained, bail hearings, you name it, anything interacting with the criminal justice system that way. If there are people working on their wills, all of the work that's being done and people wanting to get their estates in order, and frankly, right now at a time when older Vermonters are at higher risk, there are many people looking at their wills to see if they want to make any modifications. So, plus there are custody cases, there are adoption cases, there are civil matters that still keep going on despite the crisis around us. So we've been asked to consider some short-term flexibility for the way court hearings are held in terms of possible use of video, longer times for the hearings to be conducted, and also some additional flexibility in the case of criminal cases for prosecutors and the defense to try to work out solutions that don't require a court judgment. So they, as the chief judge said, that this is a how to describe it. I believe he said we've had to change our operations overnight, and I can't understate that enough. So that's another one that we'll be seeing if there's a way to work through it, but I'm not sure we can do it in the tight time frame, which means it might have to wait till a second wave of voting. One of you has commented about the public's ability to record, that the local meetings be recorded so that people can go back and listen to them. I don't know the detail of what's in the legislation, but I know that most of the technologies which would allow for a meeting to occur should accommodate a recording feature. Most people in Vermont had little experience with Zoom before this week, but as one of a number of teleconferencing sites, they do have record functions so that people could go back and either listen or view a meeting that's been held if people's images are being projected. So I'll have to see what's in the bill, but there's nothing prohibiting the recording of those meetings and making sure that it can be inspected. The federal government is likely to be voting. This time it'll start in the U.S. Senate, I believe, and then go to the House. They are talking about a fairly massive bill that would provide substantial cash to states and for federal programs. So one of the things that people have asked us here in the Vermont legislature is, when will you be, what are you going to do for this particular sector or this particular sector, or you need to immediately put money into this activity or that activity. And each one of them is said with totally the best intentions and the right spirit. We are, of course, largely going to be dependent on the actions of the federal government. They are the ones that have the massive resources to bring to bear. So we will be very closely watching what they work on in the next day and a half to see how we should be responding. I expect that the Vermont legislature, within a week or two, will be working on a package with the governor and his team to do a similar kind of infusion, maybe tailored with more local knowledge of what could help the most. So definitely be on the lookout for that. I also want to say the Speaker and I had a conversation with Senator Leahy, who of course is on the Appropriations Committee, which will be making some of the most substantial financial expenditure decisions in U.S. history in the coming days. And we cited a couple things. One is we said we really hope the federal government will step up with major support for people who are self-employed, independent contractors, sole proprietors, knowing that you haven't paid into the unemployment insurance trust fund. The federal rules often do not permit. I do not believe they permit using those dollars to support independent contractors, sole proprietors, and the self-employed. So we have asked Senator Leahy to do everything he can, which he assured us he would, to get the type of relief which would directly go to those who fall into those categories. We also brought to his attention the issue of nonprofits who right now, if they offer paid leave to any of their employees under the new federal requirement, they're supposed to get reimbursed through a tax credit. Well, if you are a nonprofit, you are not paying the taxes that a tax credit would help offset. So want to make sure that we're doing something there. Let me end with a couple additional thoughts. First, our Joint Rules Committee meetings continue to highlight just how complicated it is for any state government, let alone Vermont's, to respond very quickly to the immense shift that's occurred in just a week and a half. In the next 2 days, we will be largely focusing on hospitals and their current capacity to meet the current and expected need as we expect a surge in people who are going to need hospitalization. Also, the supplies that they have. I know that everything from N95 masks, which are the sort of more the souped up versions, they're far more than a surgical mask. The ventilators will we'll be having a discussion. Those are available to any member of the public to listen in. So for all of you who've communicated with me that have asked how ready are our hospitals to take all of this on, it will be either tomorrow or Tuesday, 4 o'clock. You can either check out my Facebook or Twitter page or go to the legislative website. It has all the call-in information there. The second thing we'll be looking at either tomorrow or Tuesday is a discussion about the state of our higher ed institutions, particularly the public ones. Needless to say, the financial impact of this is not good, and we want to get a sense of what this has done to their finances and stability. The last two things I'll say, and this really gets to the issue of the federal government and what they can and cannot do. We are receiving a tremendous volume of requests from different industries right now, each one that has been brought to heel by this sudden economic shift in the landscape. I mean, if you're in the restaurant industry, you went from, you basically had your income dropped by half or more overnight, literally, and they're desperate for support to get through the coming days. Self-employed individuals absolutely are as vulnerable as anyone right now, because if all your contracts dry up, you're in a tough moment. Plus, many of them are not going to be first on the list of outstanding payables for many businesses as they try to scramble and figure everything out. So what I really would wish to express is that for every business owner, for every self-employed individual, independent contractor, nonprofit with a particular focus that does really critical work in our state, continue to send your needs and requests to us, but please know that we won't have immediate answers or solutions in every case. The volume of the tide that we're facing right now is so overwhelming that it is going to take some time to figure out the best way to respond. I'm not saying 6 months of time. I'm saying just 8 days ago, it would have been unthinkable that we would be having these kinds of conversations. So it will take us all a little bit of time and breathing room to get this right and know how many dollars we have. And just to accentuate that point and drop in a bit of put a dark cloud, I guess, over myself for a moment, we are expecting to face a multi-$100 million reduction in revenues just for the next 3 months in state government. And that doesn't speak to what is likely to be in front of us. So all of the things we need to do to rebuild our economy once we've protected public health are all going to be done in a fiscal environment which is very, very bleak right now from Vermont's point of view, and with so much uncertainty about how much federal support we're going to get. So just know that we are all in this together with a collective challenge before us, and I know that we experience this crisis individually, but our response ultimately has to be collective, because this is having such a transformative impact on our communities that it's going to require a level of commitment on all our part to get to the other side of this successfully and sustainably, and with the most people in good health as a result. So I'm going to wrap there. Thank you, guys. Tomorrow is going to be probably much more of a daily update, in the sense that things that are going to emerge from our tax department tomorrow. The legislation will be finalized over the course of the day, and we'll have additional updates from the governor's team and others, and I'll be able to pass all those on. I would encourage you, our Economic Development Committee tomorrow is meeting, and among the issues they'll be discussing, I'm just pulling it up here, are the issue of unemployment insurance. They're going to finish that up, workers' compensation, landlord-tenant issues, and then issues specifically facing self-employed and independent contractors. So I do encourage you to call in on the legislative website. If you go to the Economic Development Committee page, you will see the way to call in and listen. Also, our Finance Committee on Wednesday is going to be talking about property taxes. The expected impact on people's ability to pay property taxes is already starting to emerge, as some people have held back their payments because they weren't sure if they were going to have income in the days ahead. And now the question at the local level is whether you're going to get a penalty for having not paid on time. That is going to play out across the state in the short term. Local decision makers aren't used to waiving penalties. Trust me, I used to be one. And so that's going to play out. The other issue is the value that people are expected to pay. How does this affect income sensitivity for those whose property taxes are adjusted based on their income? These are all amazingly complicated tax considerations that are going to have to be figured out. Like with with everything else on top of us, we've got to do a lot of deep digging here in a short period of time. Question about what time the Economic Development Committee meets tomorrow. That call is going to start at, in real time, that is going to start at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So Serena, thanks for that question. The Finance Committee's discussion on Wednesday about property taxes will start at 1:30. The Rules Committee's discussions are at 4 every single day. So if you have questions about how to access any of these meetings, let me know. I'll get you the call-in information. If nothing else, it might help you get through some of the time at home and give you an insight into the people who are doing their best right now under challenging circumstances to provide legislative responses to what's going on. So thanks a lot. I hope you have a great remainder of your Sunday and keep safe.